Kevin Durant is a potential target for the Miami Heat, but is there a competition for the future Hall of Famer? Which teams could be looking to add Durant, and how does Miami's offer compare? We'll break down the KD sweepstakes on today's episode of Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to Locked On Heat, your daily podcast on the Miami Heat, whether you're tuning in on YouTube or on your favorite podcast app. Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. I'm Wes Goldberg here with David Ramil. Both of us are credentialed Heat media members who cover this team every day. For daily content on the Heat, click that subscribe button on YouTube. Make sure you are following us on your podcast app. Have a great show for you today. We're talking about the latest on Kevin Durant. We'll talk about the teams that are potentially getting involved in a Kevin Durant deal this summer. And then we will stack up Miami's best trade offer compared to some other fake trades that could be out there this summer. But let's just start with these conflicting reports on whether or not the 76ers could try to get in on Kevin Durant this summer. It was reported by ESPN in a mock draft article that they put out that the Sixers could target Kevin Durant or Larry Markkanen with a package that includes Paul George and the number 3 pick. But then a couple days later, Jake Fisher responded to those reports saying that they were misread and that there's been no indication that they are looking to package George in the number 3 pick to move him this summer with or not for Kevin Durant. So some conflicting stuff out there for Durant, but I think this is a good launching off point for us, David, to talk a little bit more about the Kevin Durant landscape this summer. We've talked enough about, what Miami's package for Durant would look like, whether or not Durant is the answer for the Heat. You and I we're Team Kevin Durant. We're Team Kevin Durant in Miami. We think that would be a needle mover. But obviously, the Heat would have some competition for that guy this offseason. The 76ers, this is interesting. Again, conflicting reports here, but the idea of getting off of Paul George by packaging him with the number 3 pick and then adding Kevin Durant to Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey, it's at least an interesting concept.
I think it's a great move for Philadelphia. And Fisher, though, he's plugged into the 76ers organization, obviously having written a book about the front office there. And while that's a completely revamped front office from the time that he was mostly plugged in, I still think that he's well connected around the league and certainly even within Philadelphia. So I think I trust that idea, but I could see why Kevin Durant would be an interesting choice for the Sixers. I think there's a stench left over from this past season. Paul George's on and off again production and availability, and that's dogged him for a while now. And I think considering the amount of money they were paying him, the expectations were a lot higher that for George that he would be able to produce at a high level, that he would be a complementary player to Embiid, et cetera. So it just didn't quite work out the way the Sixers expected it to. And you can still rely on Durant for him to be a high-level scorer. Certainly proved availability was not a concern this past season. And I think a lot of people still assume that he's going to be injured or he's oft injured and things of that sort. No, as you've said many times, he was hurt towards the end of the season, but he was effectively shut down because they weren't competing for anything. They weren't going to be able to make any kind of deep run in the playoffs. And I think they thought it was best to just keep him from getting further injured or aggravating anything. So again, I don't think availability is the kind of concern that a lot of people assume it might be. And he's still a high level scorer in the league. And I don't think that's likely to change anytime soon because of his skill set, his size, and everything else like that. He's still one of the top scorers in the NBA. He can still play at an extremely high level. So yeah, I think he's a great addition for a lot of teams. But again, if you're going to be able to do effectively an even swap for George and KD, on the surface, it seems like a great choice. So
I don't know. The number 3 pick to move that in this draft, like it seems like something Daryl Morey would do, right? But at the same time, okay, we're going all in on Durant's awesome. You're still so reliant on Joel Embiid. Like if he goes down again, if he's not what he was a couple years ago when he was an MVP or even close to it, like we just saw in Phoenix, Kevin Durant's awesome. He's not good enough by himself to carry you to where you want to be.
Sure.
And so you're still all in on the Joel Embiid part of this window. And if you were to at least keep the number 3 pick as Philadelphia, to me, that's the smarter decision because you're still it starts and ends with Joel Embiid. If he's healthy, you're going to have a chance in the Eastern Conference.
Right.
You just will. With that roster, you will. With or without Durant. But if he goes down and you're just sort of floundering with 36-year-old Kevin Durant and Joel Embiid, we're not really sure what his future is. And yeah, we've got Tyrese Maxey and we kind of feel good about Jeremy McCain. But if you have that number 3 pick, that's like the insurance policy. It's okay, maybe we just wait out Paul George, we wait out Joel Embiid, and then at the other side of that, we have Tyrese Maxey in his prime, Jeremy McCain in his prime, and then Ace Bailey or whoever we take with number 3, and we have this player who's young and fits alongside them. I don't know. I think you just don't really see teams do that, and that's probably why Fisher is reporting, yeah, maybe like these reports are overstated. But at the same time, it wouldn't shock me if Philadelphia was trying to see what they could get out for Paul George, and maybe it's instead of 3 and Paul George just for Durant. That's where the Utah part comes into it. It's 3 and Paul George for Lauri Markkanen and wherever the Jazz ended up at 5 or 6 or whatever pick that they ended up with. That's a little bit 5. That makes a little bit more sense, right? You move down slightly in the draft, get off that Paul George contract. That makes more sense than just moving him and not getting anything back except for 36-year-old Kevin Durant.
Yeah, seems like a report that probably would have been put out by the Phoenix side of things, right? I could see why they would put out a report like that, but I imagine from Philadelphia's perspective, they probably want to, challenge that a little bit. And so I kind of tend to agree with Fisher's assessment of this situation, because I don't know, is KD that much of an improvement over Paul George that you're willing to sacrifice the number 3 pick, and as you said, something that helps you for the future, because you do have to start preparing because of the concerns of Embiid's future. He's made of glass, and that's not exactly the kind of solid foundation. When he's at a high level, he's one of the best in the NBA, but the reality is also the lack of sureness about his availability makes you kind of have to plan for 2 separate timelines simultaneously. So I don't know. As far as KD's interest around the league, again, I think maybe you have to have a specific team built in order to acquire a player like KD. He's not, as you said, is he the number 1 option still? Can you look at him in that sense? Okay. Yeah, because I tend to agree. But I think there's also the quite realistic perspective that you need to have very, 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 very good players around him in order to put yourself in a competitive.
Like if Embiid wasn't made of glass, I would do this 100 times out of 100 if I were Philadelphia. You just need the other good player with Kevin Durant, just like every other superstar needs, and that's why we like it for Miami's, because Bam is durable. Tyler Hero is evidently durable. Like these guys are out there. With Joel Embiid, it's your best player goes down. I don't care who the rest of the roster is. You don't have a shot anymore. Yeah. When you're built around a player like that. So I think that there's a ton of teams out there that could still make a lot of sense for Kevin Durant. Teams that have the infrastructure, who can depend on their other co-star to be out there and available along with Kevin Durant. Those are the teams that make sense. It's just, I don't know that anything makes sense for Philadelphia because of the Embiid situation, right? Like Kevin Durant or otherwise. It's just, they're in a really tough spot. Can I talk quickly about the Utah part of this? Because I think they're kind of interesting, because you've got Ryan Smith out here, the owner, talking about how Salt Lake City, just every interview, he's taking every interview. I mean, I think the guy's going to be on The View. He's doing everything. And he's like, Salt Lake City is the best. He's talking about like tax rates and the misconception of the population and how it's this actually like super diverse town, and the great weather, and just like he's out. He is trying to sell Salt Lake City, which good, like you're the owner, the team, like that's, I get it. I get what sense. He's trying to change the perception around the league of Salt Lake City and trying to turn it into a free agent and star destination. So, like, good luck, dude. But I'm not sure it's going to work. But good luck. And the idea of maybe flipping this report, like Lauri Markkanen and the 5th pick to Utah or to Phoenix for Kevin Durant. There's no reporting out there. But I did, like, all these, like, the Jazz part of them being tied into this report got me thinking, like, would the Jazz make a play for Kevin Durant? I don't know. To me, it's kind of funny to think about it, but this guy seems to be pretty aggressive, and I don't even know if that's what they would. It doesn't make sense of what they would want to do, but you never know.
Yeah, I think it's important to consider also, like, is that like they would send KD to Utah then for that deal?
Yeah.
Like, I don't think KD's at that point where he wants to wind up in Utah, and I think that's also something that they'd have to consider. I mean,
free agent in
he's
2026.
still, yeah. I mean, I'm not sure that that's a smart move for Phoenix or for Utah, but it's not. There's not a lot of leverage there in either perspective there. But I wonder if he about what his plans for the future are and whether or not they have to consider that in any kind of potential move.
All right, well, let's talk about that next. We're going to talk about Phoenix's perspective, and do they actually owe Kevin Durant anything when they're looking to trade him? We'll talk about all that next here on Locked On Heat.
Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. You ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, entertainment, so much more. Well, it's easy to lose track, but that's where Monarch Money comes in. They're your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So you stop just managing your money and you start building wealth. When I started using Monarch, you realize just how quickly you're spending money on things that you probably don't need to, whether it's food delivery or entertainment, just finding a way to cut out those expenses. Things are more expensive now than ever, so you need a good app to help you manage that money. That's where Monarch Money comes in. Now I budget smarter and save more. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNBA for half off your first year. We'll be right back.
So I was talking with Brendan Clean from Locked On Suns, just like on Twitter DMs and stuff, and I was asking, like, what is Phoenix looking for in a Kevin Durant trade? And he said three things. They want to remain competitive, and you already hear the new GM talking about that. He's out there. They want to remain competitive even when they trade Kevin Durant. They want draft compensation, but more than draft compensation, they actually want to remain competitive. So I think they'd be willing to take short-term, helpful rotation players over a ton of draft picks, right? Like they obviously want both, but I think they lean more towards, say, like we want the players who can help now more than just kind of adding future draft capital. Again, they want both, but they prefer the players. And then the salary cap relief, obviously, is the big one for them. So we've talked about Miami's offer, right? We know what that looks like. It's Duncan Robinson's involved because they can waive his 50% non-guaranteed contract. It's probably Wiggins or Rozier, depending on which one they want. I asked Brendan about it. He said they'd probably like Wiggins just because he's the better player. So just take the better player, don't overthink it. Even though Rozier's contract expires, like, it's just get the better player, figure it out later. And then, you start haggling over young players and draft picks and stuff like that. But you brought up an interesting point that I think we should tackle here first is, what do they owe Kevin Durant in any of this? If none of it is equal, if all of it is equal, if they're able to get some of these things that they're looking for in a trade, do they actually owe it to Kevin Durant at all to trade him somewhere that he actually wants to play? Or if it's the Utah Jazz who have the best offer, they say, hey, buddy, have fun in Salt Lake City, get used to skiing.
It's a free agent destination there. It's a beautiful city, really. It's interesting because KD, he's never really, I think it's mostly been media members that kind of speculate at the alleged wish lists, whether it was being sent to, when he joined Brooklyn, obviously he joined as a free agent. When he was traded later on, it was, the idea was it was a competition between Miami and Brooklyn, but I don't think we ever got any kind of firm reporting on that, nor it didn't feel like it followed the same pattern as the Dame Lillard one. And we all know how that played out.
That's a really good point. I hadn't thought about that, but even when he was leaving Oklahoma City for Golden State, remember there was a lot of reporting on, Kevin Durant might want to return to Washington, where, because he grew up in the area. And there was never any real indication that Kevin Durant had any interest in joining the Wizards. It was just a thing that was floated out there because LeBron did it. Right. Like, he just went back to Cleveland, and now there was this idea that all superstars want to go home, even though that's never really been the case other than just with LeBron James. And then we just sort of applied that to every other superstar that had a decision to make after LeBron. But yeah, there was nothing there. And then even with the Brooklyn thing, everybody was like, oh, he's going to go to the Knicks. He wants to go play in New York. He wants to go to the Knicks. And he never even gave the Knicks a chance.
Right.
So you're right. Like in terms of the reporting around Durant for the last 10 years, it just feels like nobody's actually had a good read on what it is that he wants to do.
I think Phoenix is in a really precarious situation here because with their front office, a new front office in place here, they want to make sure that they kind of do right. I think KD ultimately chose Phoenix, or however it played out, whether or not that was just the best deal for Brooklyn. I think his decision making, or at least his input on the choice to go join Phoenix, played a role. It certainly did over any other potential suitors, whether we know about them or not, whether Miami was included or not. It's all a moot point. He's played in Phoenix for the last few seasons, and I think it's likely that he's going to be moved. So I think from Phoenix's standpoint, they've got to be able to honor the fact that a Hall of Famer and all-time great did choose to play out here and to kind of add some relevance to a franchise that maybe had lost it in recent seasons. And I think you have to be able to sit down with KD and map out a preferred destination and then see what you can get and see if this could wind up being a very big deal, as you said, because I think it could be a multi-team deal where everybody gets a little bit of something that they want in order to accommodate KD's requests. Like, I mean, we saw it played out kind of with Jimmy Butler the same way. Like, in order to get Jimmy to where he wants to go, and this was because of a contract demand, et cetera, I think you have to wind up taking on a number of teams or looking at different opportunities here so that somebody gets that extra pick, somebody gets that kind of role player that could wind up adding something to their roster, because ultimately it does wind up becoming about where that star player wants to go. And I think that's important to take in mind. KD does have that cachet around the league. He does have, I think, again, Phoenix, it will behoove them to honor any specific requests he had. Although I don't think he's the type also to just limit it and say, I specifically want to go here. So I think it's an interesting challenge for the Suns front office, especially when they're trying to make sure that the rest of the league says, you know what, we take care of our guys. He came here. We appreciate his couple seasons here. And now that we're ready to move him to a place where he can continue competing for a championship, we want to make sure that he's happy in the place where he wants to be.
Well, the other part of it, too, is he does have leverage in this and saying, like, I'm going to be a free agent in 2026. So if I don't want to play for you long term, he could play out the year and he could just say, like, you can offer me as many extensions as you want. I'm not going to sign them. I'm going to make a decision in 2026. And, it's a little bit different than the Giannis situation because Giannis has 2 more years left on his contract before he could become a free agent. And if you're a team that isn't typically a destination, Utah, for instance, whatever, I'm just using them as an example now. But I promise I'm not trying to trade all the stars to the Jazz. But you could just say, you could kind of do what Cleveland did with Donovan Mitchell and say, yeah, I know that people don't think that he's going to be here long term, but we've got 2 years to show him instead of the 1. Yeah. And you saw what happened. Donovan Mitchell said, yeah, you know what? First of all, the money's not really out there in free agency. I kind of like it with Cleveland. We've built something here, and I think we can win here. And he resigned the max extension there. 1 year is not really enough because even if you were Cleveland, you could say, well, we had Donovan Mitchell for 2 years. We gave it a shot, and you could feel pretty good about it, even if you were to walk away. But if you were to trade a bunch of stuff for Durant and then he just walks away after 7 months, you'd be taking a pretty heavy L there. I don't know that's worth the investment. So, Durant does have leverage in this whole thing. And that's why I do think we'll ultimately get some sort of list of preferred destinations from KD. He did show even before the trade deadline, right? Phoenix had a deal worked out with Golden State reportedly, and Phoenix and Durant shut it down. He said, I don't want to play. I don't want to go back there right now. Like, that's not something that I want to be doing. So they did honor his wishes in that regard, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's something to be said there. But on the other end of it is Durant. That's Durant flexing some muscles and saying, this is at least something that I don't want. And that was out there. And he was very open about it. He went on Draymond Green's podcast and talked about it. Like, this is not reporting. This is straight from Kevin Durant's mouth. So I do think that they're going to work together. And maybe we don't get a public list of preferred destinations. And it won't be, to your point, one destination the way that Damian Lillard did it. It'll probably be a list, and they'll probably have to go from there. Because other teams, again, will just be, yeah, he doesn't want to resign with us long term. It's not worth the risk for us.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think there's a lot to consider there. And I keep coming back to the fact that I think KD is still a very valuable player. And I think there's this kind of idea around the league, or from some fans anyway, that maybe he's not the player that he once was. And I think that's kind of tarnished the conversation about KD, that maybe he's not the kind of star player who can still have that sort of leverage. And that is so far from the truth.
There's a bunch of fake trades and stuff that we could talk about. I think there's a bunch of teams that will at least offer something to Phoenix. Let's just have some fun with it. I've got a bunch of fake trades, David, that I put together. We're going to take these fake trades. We'll judge them against maybe Miami's best offer, whether we think that this makes any sense for Phoenix. Again, just trying to get a landscape of what the Kevin Durant thing could look like this summer. We'll do that next year on Locked On Heat. Thanks again for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Like and subscribe on YouTube. Follow us on your favorite podcast app. David, I came up with a bunch of fake trades for Kevin Durant from across the league. So let's take a look at them, and you can tell me if you're a Phoenix, whether or not this makes any sense for you. And, you know, we can compare it to what we think Miami could offer here. So we'll start with Utah. Larry Markkinen, number 5 for Kevin Durant. We kind of talked about that one already, but I thought it was just interesting. Just seems like a lot for Utah to give up.
Yeah, I don't think there's any... I don't think, that doesn't make the kind of sense it does. Because I think Markkinen might be, you know, a very good player who would love to play in Utah and would love to continue doing, and to package him and the 5th pick for KD, as much of an improvement as KD might be over Markkinen. It just does not make a lot of sense. It does not seem like the timeline that Utah wants to follow right now.
Memphis. Desmond Bane, Brandon Clark, and a 2028 first-round pick. And their pick situation is kind of weird, so there could be some swaps in there too and stuff like that. But Bane next to Booker would be an interesting backcourt of the future, at least. Brandon Clark's a big man.
Yeah, I like the deal a lot for Memphis. I think obviously that makes a lot of sense for them. It's a sacrifice on Bane, who's a fine player and everything else like that. But from Phoenix's perspective, yeah, I could see that being an interesting deal. I don't know if the Bane-Booker pairing works so well. But at least you get that kind of young player and you can remain competitive now. Yeah. I like Clark, but I don't think it's enough. I think you'd have to probably add something now.
Yeah, it feels like it's missing one good young. Like, do they need Zach Edey in there? Do they need Jalen Wells in there? Does that even move it? Does Jalen Wells move the needle for you if you're Phoenix? I don't know. Like, I like Jalen Wells fine, but does Edey move the needle for you instead of Clark?
Yeah.
Okay, so you put Edey in there instead of Clark. So Bane, Edey, the first-round pick, and then maybe you can put some other salary in there, but that would be the bones of the deal. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Denver. Which might be my favorite non-Miami place for Durant. Kevin Durant with Nikola Jokic would be fascinating. Michael Porter Jr., Christian Brown, and they could only trade the 2031 pick. They don't have any other first-round picks. So an unprotected 2031 pick from Denver, plus Michael Porter Jr. in that salary, and Christian Brown. You might have to throw like Zeke Naji or something like that in there to make the salaries work. But those, again, that's the bones of the deal. MPJ Brown, a future first-round pick for Kevin Durant to pair Durant with Joker.
I mean, I think that's a great deal for Denver. I think the ability to move the MPJ deal is a big one. And I think, again, if you're getting Porter Jr. and you can assume or assure that he's going to stay healthy, it kind of is a great deal for Phoenix too. But I don't know that we're ever going to see that version. I don't know that Michael Porter Jr. is ever going to be, or I think that reputation is very different. I think we've kind of seen that maybe it could work out. So it could be a high risk move, but it also doesn't feel like quite the move that Phoenix would want if they want to stay competitive this year, right? I think that as much as MPJ is a really solid player and a guy who could help contribute and play off of Booker, etc., is he a win now kind of guy? I don't know.
He's definitely not a win later guy.
Yeah.
So if he's a win guy at all, it's a win now guy. I don't know. It works out where if you get Michael Porter Jr. and Christian Brown, you have two
championship
high-ish end starters back and then a pick. It does fall flat a little bit because you're not getting any of the salary cap relief that Phoenix would want. So now you're becoming really expensive as a team built around Devin Booker, Bradley Beal, Michael Porter Jr., and Christian Brown, who's going to need an extension. You're just as expensive where you're for a team that feels like you're an expensive team that has just one superstar player on it.
Yeah.
Where for that expensive of a team, you would think you would have 2 or 3 superstar players on it. So it falls short to me in the salary cap part of it, but it's interesting. Atlanta, which I feel like doesn't get talked about enough. Everybody keeps looking at the Hawks and saying, "Oh, will they trade Trae Young? Will they trade Trae Young?" Are they buyers potentially? First of all, I don't think did they hire a GM yet? I have no idea who's in charge in Atlanta, but I came up with, I don't know if they would do this, but a package based on Jalen Johnson and draft picks, and you might have to throw like a Terrence Mann or something like that in there to make the salaries work. But if I'm Phoenix, Jalen Johnson is really interesting to me. But he's another guy with those health issues.
Yeah, but he's young enough, so it's a good risk worth taking, I think, from Phoenix's perspective. Again, a win now guy if he stays healthy, but
almost in all
future now.
Yeah, and before he got hurt, he was like all-star, playing at all-star level. He was probably going to be an all-star if he didn't get hurt before.
For Atlanta, that feels like the kind of move to kind of bring fans in, say, look, we're adding another superstar, like a superstar of credible name recognition here. That's
I kind of like it.
I don't know that Phoenix could say no to that kind of deal.
Ooh. Yeah. All right, can I give you my last one, and it's my favorite non-Heat one?
Okay.
Durant for Sabonis. Sacramento Kings. Domantas Sabonis solves your center problem in Phoenix. Durant goes to Sacramento.
Straight up trade, salaries match.
You would have to throw in like another something as Sacramento to get the salaries to work, I think, unless they might have the cap space, but that's the bones of the deal. Durant for Sabonis. Nothing else, meaningful going either way. I kind of like it the most out of a thought experiment, and then hate it the most for both teams. Because I don't know what that means. Durant in Sacramento playing with Zach LaVine, I'm not sure what that does for them.
Zach LaVine and DeMar DeRozan.
Right. What a nightmare.
None of that seems like it would work very well.
Which is exactly why Sacramento would do it.
Right. Let's add another scorer to the mix. Would Phoenix? Yeah, for Phoenix, they'd have to do that deal too, because again, you can sell that on remaining competitive, high-end player, all-star, solves a glaring need in our roster.
Durant's walking away anyway. We're getting an all-NBA center back.
Yeah, I mean, it's not unlike if Miami were to include Bam Adebayo. I know for Heat fans, maybe they might not want to consider that, but I mean, if this was the if Miami was playing the role of Sacramento in this potential deal and they included Bam Adebayo, although I think again Bam is a completely different player than Sabonis and different value, in my opinion, a higher value. Not everybody sees it that way. I mean, given Sabonis's production and his rebounding and what he does do well, he's a great add for a team like Phoenix that keeps you competitive, makes a lot of sense. Yeah, if Sacramento was interested in adding Kevin Durant, and I'm not saying that they are, then any kind of deal, including Sabonis, would trump anything that Miami has to offer by a wide margin.
Yeah, to your point, it would be like if Miami just said Bam for Durant straight up, Phoenix would have to do it, right? And
sure.
and they wouldn't, for the record, but the Kings are in a different position. Like, we don't really know what they're doing, and it kind of feels like they have to make a decision on something. I don't think they would do it. That to me seems crazy. Like, yeah. 3 scorers who are all overpaid. That worked so well for Phoenix. We're gonna do that here in Sacramento. But then again, they are the Kings. So I don't know. I thought that was interesting, the fake trade. So who knows, right? Kevin Durant has so much leverage in this situation. He could be like, I don't want to play in Utah, Memphis, Sacramento, Denver, Atlanta. I don't want to play in any of those places. We have no idea what his preferences are. He is going to have quite a bit of leverage over his situation this summer. We do expect Miami to at least be interesting to him, because Miami tends to be interesting for star players. But we've made our pitch. Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NBA Big Board Show. NBA draft expert Rafael Barlow reacts to every workout, interview, and rumor leading up to the NBA draft. Find Locked On NBA Big Board on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts.